Trevor. Trevor.
I hear a voice
Yes, Trevor. Listen,
of
before
somebody I do not want to talk to,
I
but
know, I know.
I'll be responsible here. Yes, yeah. Is
Yes,
that
this
you,
is
Don?
it is
Don,
me.
is that
It is
you?
Trevor, it is me. Listen, before we start the show, this
Yes.
is I don't know if you know this. This is going to be our Valentine's Day episode. And
God.
yeah, we're close to Valentine's Day here when we record this.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to be sad or lonely or not have a gift from someone. So Trevor, I have a gift for you.
Trevor, Todd Stashwick here. This is kind of an intervention. I play Captain Liam Shaw on the show with this ship. This is an intervention. So, I the number one host of the No Win Scenario podcast, Don, wanted me to reach out to you, the second best host of the show, and he wants me to tell you to stop calling him. You are he's a little tired of hearing about your love for Star Trek and beyond Genesis, whatever you call it. I mean, I'm not a nerd. So he wants me to say, hey, can you knock it off with all the Trek stuff? It's a little too much. The Picard stuff, it's a little too much. Look, I understand it. I completely get your devotion to a franchise with maybe the finest captain in Starfleet. But Don's he's had it up to here. So
It's only 4 feet because that's how tall Don is.
So put it on ice. Cool your jets. Stop being such a nerd. And you're a terrible sci-fi fan, and he says that you have zero class. His words, not mine. I just want you to know that I appreciate your Trek love and all of your nerdiness. This is him. I'm just the messenger. Don't phaser the messenger. Do you understand what I'm saying? But in the meantime, I hope our paths cross in the future. Live long and prosper.
There you go. Happy Valentine's Day, Trevor.
I want
Because I don't know when your birthday is, so I don't care. So I figured.
in post production, get ready to beep this out. You are such a. You are such a. People will still be able to read my lips. Huge. But I loved it. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
I think that's the first time you've put even a penny towards my entertainment. And I know that was so hard for you. Very, very difficult. And I genuinely thank you for that. That was very, very funny. And could I get a copy, please?
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm thinking we should put this up on our website,
Are you kidding me? Absolutely.
Absolutely. So everyone go check it out. And Trevor, let's get on with the show.
Sounds great. I haven't listened to anything you've said in the last 20 seconds.
Damn it, Trevor.
Oh, God, I hate you so much.
Well, it's you. We can cross off the reading.
I watch almost everything, and the majority of it is terrible.
What is this podcast about?
My recorder keeps turning off.
Damn it, Trevor. Hi, everyone, and welcome to No Win Scenario Podcast. I am Don, and with me is my little sidekick, Trevor.
The little sidekick who I think is at least 2 feet taller than you.
At least 2 feet taller, and according to my daughter, a couple of decades older too. So some of us age better than others.
I hate you.
Well, that was quite a long little cold open we had with Todd Stashwick. So I'm very excited to get to our guest today, David Mack.
But before we do that,
what's coming?
you know what time it is?
Oh God. What time?
Trevor's Tangent. Okay, we're going to break the format a little bit. I'm going to involve Don in this, and believe it or not, this actually is science fiction related. In 1999, a little clever satire parody film came out called Galaxy Quest.
Love it.
And I saw it maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and I hated it.
Well, of course, because you hate anything that normal people like.
It was terrible.
What?
A few nights ago, the Alamo Drafthouse in Boston was having a repertory screening of Galaxy Quest. A friend asked me to go. She said, listen, I love this movie. It's hilarious. I told her I didn't like it. She said, you're insane. Come with me. Give it another try. I said, fine. Give it another try. Within 10 minutes, I realized
you were wrong.
That this film
is brilliant.
Is so clever.
So clever.
And so funny.
One of the best Star Trek movies ever.
And so well written.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go further. I'm going to suggest that the film even has a deep layer to it. It's so clever and well done that I honestly felt that I was seeing a group of people, that there was this underlying theme here, a group of people who, other than their ego, really didn't have much at stake, but then were put into a situation where they really had to learn as actors what improvisation really means. And improvisation when stakes are on the line, like the eradication of an alien race, and it's just there under the surface on top of all of this just humor, well-staged direction. I will argue, even though it was kind of satirical, I would argue that the production design and the special effects were very good and served its purpose. I was dead wrong about the film. Galaxy Quest is very clever, very smart, very funny. If you haven't seen it, which I'm sure everybody who listens to this podcast, 5 of you, have seen it.
Trevor.
It's a very good film.
Trevor, you have wasted minutes of our audience's valuable time where you're the only person on this planet who thought the movie was bad in their lifetime and who hasn't seen it in the last 15 years.
Well, maybe this is my way of trying to win a couple listeners on my side, you know.
We'll keep working on it. We'll keep working on it.
Thank you. Let's keep working on it.
And
that is the end. Well, are you happy for me that I liked it?
We're all happy that this conversation is over. So can we end it, please?
And that's it for Trevor's Tangent.
Fantabulous. Okay, and with that, I am super excited to talk to our next guest, Dave Mack. So everyone stay tuned.
I was so excited when this person was announced because I actually knew who they were.
And be ready,
I can't wait. This is so good. I can't wait.
It's great. And Trevor admits to having read
a book.
Who knew?
Period. A book. Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm David Mack. I'm a New York Times bestselling author of science fiction, fantasy, and adventure, most of it for Star Trek over the years. I've also written for Star Trek on television, for Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I've been a creative consultant for Star Trek Prodigy, Star Trek Lower Decks, Star Trek Discovery. I'm working on a number of different projects at the moment, some of them with Star Trek, some of them original. And I've written for Trek in pretty much every format you can think of, except for feature film. I've written for video games, comic books, short fiction, reference works, CD-ROMs, computer games, TV. I mean, at this point, really, I've done just about everything but feature film. I even wrote stuff for what was going to be a live touring theatrical production featuring the music of Star Trek, but it got canceled because it was being produced during the COVID era, and the pandemic basically just wiped out all the pre-sales and ended up shutting down the show. But it was going to be this European-based production. So I've written for Star Trek professionally now since 1995, maybe even a little earlier than that if you take into account some work I did for the Books Office as a freelancer. So I've been working professionally in one capacity or another for Star Trek for nearly 30 years.
It's amazing. And my bookshelf at home is just stacked with your books over the years up there with everything else. So it's thank you so much for joining us. And you got to imagine that writing a Trek book is much more limiting in terms of what you can do than something completely original on your own, or is that not the case at this point?
I know a lot of people think, the bigger it gets, the more stories that are told, the more canon that's established, they think that makes it harder to tell stories in the Star Trek universe. In fact, the more developed the universe becomes, the easier it becomes to develop new stories within it, because the canvas gets bigger, the cast gets bigger, the known facts in evidence get bigger, and sometimes each thing you establish, each fact you establish in canon, rather than cutting off opportunities, it often raises new questions. Each fact you establish raises 2 or 3 new questions that could be springboards for stories. So I have not actually found working in Star Trek to be limiting. I have actually found the expansive growth of the franchise over the last few decades to have been a great spur to creativity.
Before we get into Star Trek and certain properties specifically, I would like to know, what is your writing workflow process? Is it a daily thing? Do you have certain hours set for it? Don't interrupt me during these hours. What's it like? What's the discipline?
It has changed over the years. When I first started out, I was working full time at NBC and the Sci-Fi Channel. I was the editor of sci-fi.com back before it became Sci-Fi. And so I would work, I'd get up early in the morning and go to work in the city, work all day, sometimes into the evening, because hours could be just, crazy when you're working in television and especially working in marketing. And then I would come home and deal with, home-related business, dinner, dishes, paying the bills, dealing with the cats, all that sort of thing. And then I would usually get to work, around 9, 10 o'clock at night, and I'd work till about 1 or 2 in the morning and, write what I could, and then get up at 7 or 8 the next morning, go back to work and do it all again. I did that for 8 years. The first 8 years of, my novel writing career, my book writing career, that was how it worked. And then basically I was working full time. I was writing books at night, put my wife through grad school. And then once she was out of grad school and into her new profession, the deal we had made was, once she's employed, I wanted out of the corporate sector. I had done 17 years in corporate America and I was done. I had saved a lot of money to sort of, facilitate the translation, the transition into freelance life. So I wasn't going in unprepared. And this was just the deal we made. So she got a job right out of grad school. I left Sci-Fi in May of 2008 and went freelance. So coming up, 15 and a half years ago. And since then, what happened was, because my brain had been programmed to write at night, I found that was when I write. I had sort of just, the pathways got ingrained over 8 years. So even when I left the job, I still don't write during the day. I don't usually write when the sun is up. Daytime hours I use for other aspects of running my business as a writer. I use the daytime hours for things like promotion, social media, paying my bills, dealing with taxes, dealing with corporate paperwork on the state level, depending on where I'm doing business. Meetings with editors, via Zoom, meeting with editors in person in the city. Dealing with also just domestic business around the house, running my day-to-day life. I basically run the house so that my wife can do what she does in a very demanding medical field. So
my follow-up question to that is that their life gets in the way.
Always.
And there are days where there's a lot of stress, or days when something out of the blue happens.
That's almost every day.
And so when you sit down to write that night, how do you separate that out of your writing workflow so that it doesn't necessarily affect what you're writing? Does that make any sense?
Let's say, I'm just going to go with I drink.
And I was going to say follow-up to the follow-up is, when do you sleep? But
I sleep probably usually about 4 a.m. to about noon.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think, Trevor, if I could translate maybe for you, because the ER gibberish is just not making any sense. I think what Trevor's getting at is, how do you not have what happens in your daily life affect what you're going to be writing? So if you have the plan to write whatever part of whatever story that you're working on coming up, how do you not emotionally get distracted by what's happened during the day and have
Sometimes you don't. Sometimes a day is just a wash. Some days are simply too much, and regardless of whether you're on deadline or not, there are some days when you just have to accept that life takes the forefront. Example, I was in the middle of writing Firewall last year, and around May, which was the time I was hoping to sort of get some momentum going on the manuscript after numerous delays in getting the story approved. I was finally ready to go, and then life got in the way. My wife's father died.
Oh,
And there
so
were
sorry.
a lot of things that had to be dealt with during the month of May. My wife suddenly had to go away to Texas to be with her family, but she was also shuttling between Texas and Illinois, which is where her father was going to be buried and where the service was going to be. And then, I had to coordinate her travel arrangements, and there's lots of expenses we didn't expect, and she's taking time off from work, unexpectedly. I have to arrange for cat sitters. I got to arrange to follow her out to Illinois for the services. I got to have somebody to take care of my house. I got to make sure things don't fall apart in my absence. And then there's just the emotional toll of, losing a close family member. Losing my father-in-law hit me very hard. And it was just one of those things where the month of May, the entire month, as a result, was a wash. There was just no way around it. That was the way it was. And trying to pretend that it wasn't that way, trying to pretend that I could just get up, go on, and sit back down and go back to work as if nothing had happened. That's crazy. Sometimes you just can't do that. Yeah. And so I had to accept that the month of May was out the window. Yep. And then again, I got back to work in June and July, and I was working along, and I got into August, and I was closing in on the end of the book. I was maybe literally a few, I was tracking the days. I knew my output rate, and I knew that I was within maybe a few days of finishing the manuscript. And I was hoping to even have it done a few days early, ahead of deadline. And then I got COVID last August. My wife had picked it up by accident. She had been traveling into the city and hadn't had access to masks, and she had to take the subway. And subway is basically a giant human bacteria tube. And so she brought it home. She got sick. I got sick. And I got really sick. I ended up in the hospital. My first day of COVID, I went to the ER.
Oh, it's terrible.
So it really kicked the daylights out of me. And again, something like that happens, and you can't pretend it doesn't happen. It happens. You hit something like that, it hits you like a truck, and it takes a little while to get back up to speed. So I lost about a week of time that I wanted to, that I would have spent writing. I suddenly had to focus on not dying. So I did that. Got that out of the way and got myself back to work. And I literally made my deadline by a matter of hours.
Wow.
So I got the book done on time. Technically, legally, if you were to look at delivery time, the contract, yes, delivered on time per contract by a matter of hours.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. I would love to actually, because you mentioned something there early on, but go to the development of Firewall. So your new book, Star Trek Picard, Firewall. You said you had problems getting the story approved, or was there resistance to something specific in there?
Well, I mean, it's just one of those things where when you're dealing with so many different ideas going on, you've got the writer with their idea, you've got the licensor who has their concept, you've got the editor and what they need, and you've got to reconcile these three things. So it's not just a matter of pleasing my editor, it's also a matter of I have to meet the expectations and dictates of the licensor. In this case, Kirsten Beyer, who is a good friend of mine, fellow novelist. Now she's the co-creator of Star Trek Picard. She's worked on several of the recent Star Trek TV live action series. She's working on Starfleet Academy right now. She is the point person right now within Secret Hideout, in charge of vetting and approving novels and comic books and other narrative materials, narrative tie-ins, based on the Secret Hideout live action shows. So if it's based on Strange New Worlds, Discovery, Picard, and now Starfleet Academy, Section 31, it has to go through her. She has to approve it. So when I was approached by SNS, when I met with them back in, December, I think maybe December of 22, 21, I don't remember. Somewhere back there, I had a nice lunch with my editors, and I asked, what they needed coming up in the next cycle of books. And they said, would you like to write the story of Seven of Nine joining the Fenris Rangers? How and why? And considering that, the first time I watched the episode Stardust City Rag that established the existence of the Fenris Rangers, I paused the episode. Like, this is the first night it's dropped. I'm watching it. I paused the playback so that I could pick up my phone and email my editor, hey, I'd like to write a novel about the Fenris Rangers. And I get a response back like 5 minutes later saying, we've been told no books about the Fenris Rangers while Picard is still on the air because they don't know what they want to do with it. Mm-hmm. So it was hands off for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then suddenly here's the offer. Do I want to write the story of how and why Seven, instead of joining Starfleet, why did she get rejected from Starfleet? How and why did she end up with the Rangers? I'm like, well, yeah, I'd love to take that job. I'll take that job. Thank you. And so I'm told, go away, start thinking up an idea. So I go and I start thinking up an idea, but the idea has to get approved by Kirsten. And Kirsten, because she, a lot of people know this already, but I'll reiterate for those who don't know. Kirsten was the author who wrote most of the Voyager books set after the end of series. She picked up pretty much where Christy Golden left off. And she did a whole series of 7 or 8 Voyager novels that dealt with Voyager going back to the Delta Quadrant, with a whole fleet called the Full Circle Initiative or whatever. And so she was very possessive of the Voyager characters in general and Seven of Nine in particular. Mm-hmm. She had done a lot of work with the character, and although those books are now out of continuity because of Picard, there was still a deep attachment on Kirsten's part to the character of Seven, and she had very clear ideas about how she wanted Seven portrayed in the books, particularly during the era in which Voyager has just come home. Because when we see her in Picard, that's 20 years after Voyager has come home. This is 20 years along. So we're talking about now 20 years earlier. Voyager has just come home. Seven is still fairly young, only about 31, 32. And so she's in a very different place in her life. She's not the character we see in Stardust City Rag. She hasn't lost Icheb yet. She hasn't been hardened by 20 years of vigilante justice. She's not that person yet. And so Kirsten wanted me to adjust certain assumptions I had made in the story. She wanted it toned down. She wanted a lower body count. She didn't want Seven to be a killer. She said that Seven is not that person yet, and she's still going to be very much the person that Janeway has helped her to become, and she's not that ruthless person yet. Life has not beaten her up to that degree yet. But she is starting to get, a taste of what's happening in the world. So there were a lot of things about the depiction of how Seven acts, what Seven believes, and also how we handled the transition of Seven from being what we saw. Her relationships of a romantic variety in Voyager were primarily heterosexual in nature. And now we see that she has embraced queer relationships, lesbian relationships by the time of Star Trek Picard. So clearly she underwent some process of, personal change and growth where, she discovered new things about herself. So that was also part of the story that Kirsten wanted told.
Okay.
And it was a matter of going back and forth and negotiating and saying, well, we can do this, or I see why you're asking for this, but how about doing it this way instead? So getting the story approved, it wasn't that we had large disagreements over what the story was about. It was about the finer points of how to make sure that it comported with Kirsten's vision and the show's depiction of Seven, while also making sense with who Seven was at the end of Voyager. And just making sure that we all still felt like at the end it felt like a Star Trek story, while at the same time being a realistic exploration of Seven's psyche during an extremely important and formative period of her life.
That's amazing. And I got to say, you were kind enough to get Trevor and I an advance copy of the book, so we appreciate that. And Trevor and I agree on almost nothing, but we both were like, wow, we came to each other and said, wow, I really like this. So we really appreciate it. But, it's talking about the finer point, like I had a funny and a good way reaction, like just early on, Seven goes to a club and is dancing. And I'm like, has that ever happened before? She goes dancing there. She has a one night stand with an Adorian. Like, I'm like, it's much more like everything's, like that side of her is there, but it seemed very raw and realistic. And it not something you see in a lot of Star Trek books, unless, correct me if I'm wrong, that you write that other people write. But I think it felt freer in a way, this book. Did it feel that? I mean, am I reading too much into that?
It's a very different sort of thing than I've done in a lot of my previous Trek books, and it's different from a lot of other Trek books in that there are really only a small handful of previously established Star Trek canon characters in the book, and that is Seven and Janeway. And to a lesser degree, there's a couple of appearances by characters from Star Trek Prodigy, like Tysus and Dr. Noom, who are canon. But the rest of the story is Seven alone. I mean, she's carrying the whole story by herself, really, in a very big way. But yeah, the whole thing about her going to the club and this exploration of life, the entire point of Firewall as a novel is that it's structured like a classic Bildungsroman or coming-of-age tale. And the idea behind Firewall is that it's supposed to be, for Seven, a queer normative coming-of-age tale, except that in the fin de siècle, late 24th, early 25th century Federation, being lesbian or whatever is not considered any big deal. That's not going to be a source of stigma to deal with. Yeah. But we find the allegory for that in the fact that because she has Borg implants that she cannot be rid of, because it would kill her if they took them out, she has this sort of mark, this indelible thing that people can see that says,
you're different.
You're different.
You're different.
You are not us. You are an outsider.
You're a secret plant that's going to destroy us all.
Right. So she gets treated with prejudice. When she's first living on Earth. This is a culture that has still just barely survived recent near fatal brushes with the Borg. They're still terrified of the Borg. There's a lot of prejudice. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anger. So when she starts living there, early in the book, you see she gets her house vandalized. Somebody paints "Die Borg Bitch" on the front of her house. And the cops aren't really interested in doing anything about it. And it's because she has this very visible thing that makes her different and therefore self-conscious. But she can't change. In that respect, it could be an allegory for both prejudice against race, but also it's about prejudice against those who are openly queer, openly different, anything not cis heteronormative. And then you've got the fact that she has this running problem with the Federation, where, for instance, they deny her application to have her citizenship restored. They thought, first of all, they thought she was dead, so you got to bring somebody back from the dead for one thing. That's hard enough. But then she wants, to say, well, I'm not Annika Hansen, I'm 7 of 9. Well, this trips up the Federation because 7 of 9 is a Borg designation. And if she's choosing Borg designation, does that mean her sympathies and her allegiances are with the Borg? And if so, doesn't that make her an enemy of the state? So as a result, they wind up tying up her citizenship application. So she can't get citizenship. She's classified as a permanent alien resident. And then on top of that, she can't get into Starfleet because they're paranoid. Is she going to actually be a Borg agent? Is she an infiltrator? Has she been sent all this way just to worm her way in, at Starfleet Academy, Starfleet Command? Sure, she was fine on Voyager, but her Voyager record is full of multiple incidents of violent attempts to escape, violent altercation, attempts to rejoin the Borg Collective, attempts to betray the ship to the Borg Collective. She did this like 3 times. She has multiple infractions that would cause Starfleet Command to go, what? And you want to give her a commission? Are you out of your minds? So she's getting pushed back from Starfleet. She's getting pushed back from the Federation. But the worst part of all is that because she's chosen this Borg designation that, again, her very designation, her name, casts her as an outsider. And then she goes, for instance, it says early in the book, she goes to visit her Aunt Irene, and her Aunt Irene can't stop calling her Annika. And no matter how many times she corrects her aunt, I'm not Annika, I'm 7, the aunt keeps calling her Annika, just refuses to accept the new name. She keeps dead naming her. That is because another important aspect of Firewall is that it's also an allegory for trans identity. I don't know if you guys have gotten to the end of the book yet, the action climax. If so, I don't want to spoil. Let's just say there is a moment that is meant to be sort of one of those fist pump in the air moments when she essentially gets to tell somebody off about, don't ever tell me I don't know my own name. And that's basically for every trans person who's ever been dead named and just had to swallow it.
And that's so that's great. And I think that lines up with the TV show, right? Picard, like how she handles in season 3, how she, Shaw's, how he uses her name and how that's a big thread there. I am curious though about, in your acknowledgement, so I skipped ahead to the acknowledgements you dedicated to the LGBTQIA plus community, your take on her relationship development, how you developed it further in the book than where it was from Voyager. The show in seasons 1 and 2 had this relationship with Rafi in season 2, and then season 3, some people have complained that it was just kind of ignored or left to the wayside, barely mentioned or barely hinted at. I'm curious if that bumped.
I mean, I can't speak to what the producers.
Of course not.
I wasn't in the room, but if I had to guess, having watched Picard season 3, you've only got so many minutes.
Yeah, there's no time. There was no time for it. Yeah,
and they were concentrating on a very plot-driven, high velocity, very fast-paced narrative, and I just don't think that there was a lot of time or a lot of downtime in the plot they had built to sort of allow those sort of slower, more personal moments between Seven and Rafi. But I think also what we're supposed to take away, my guess, this is what I took away from it, is that Seven and Rafi were a couple. It didn't work out. There was some awkwardness for a while, but what we take from Picard season 3 is they've moved past the awkwardness of the breakup so that they can still be friends. Maybe there's a chance that something could redevelop someday, but right now they're not a romantic item. They are people who were briefly together, but relationships end for all kinds of reasons, and they don't always have to be cataclysmic. And it could just be that they dated and it didn't work out, and there was some anger and some bitterness, some residual, some lingering, animosity about it, but they got over it.
I think that's reasonable to me. I think, who knows? Yeah, we'll ask Terry Metalis one day. But I think sometimes sometimes the fans get a little worked up over it or not. But that was my segue to, do fans bother you? Because I was on your webpage and I love your FAQ, and your FAQ is question: can you help me get an agent? Answer: no. Will you help me get my Star Trek novel published? Answer: no. Would you be willing to collaborate with me? No. Are you sure you won't help me? No. I'm positive. And so on. So I guess my question is sort of, the fans, how do you feel?
Well, first of all, that FAQ, that draft of it was written almost 15 years ago when I redesigned the website. Back then, I got a lot more of it than I do now. Some of the things I would add stuff to the bottom. The more recent things I get in my feedback queue are basically fans who are only just now or in the last few years have discovered my 4400 novel, for which I was specifically hired with the remit of, well, the show isn't coming back. We don't know what they were going to do for a finale. So they hired me and Greg Cox to write a 2-part story, him writing part 1 and me writing the conclusion. They said, imagine what you would do for the finale of the 4400 if you got to write it. And so I took the mythology of the 4400 and I wrote it. And then at the end, I turned in my manuscript and the editor said, well, we don't know if this book sells. If these do really well, we might
more.
Continue the thing. So could you add a tag? Could you add a scene here that would enable us to spin off and keep going with more books? I said, doesn't that dilute the impact of the ending of the book? And they said, yes, but at least it leaves a door open if we need to. And I was thinking, well, we could always put that
needs more money.
at the beginning of another book in the future. But sure, if you really want me to, I'll do that. So I did it. And then, of course, it confused the living daylights out of all the poor 4,400 fans who got to the end of what should have been the conclusive ending of the story. And then they get this tag scene that implies there's more. And they go, so what happens next? Where's the next book? And I go, well, these books didn't sell. They didn't commission them. There are no more. Well, what am I supposed to do now? I say, rip out the last few pages of the book and just pretend you never read them.
Yeah.
That's my best offer. I don't know what to do. I can't help you. Tear those pages out and just pretend you didn't read them.
I got to imagine there's frustration all the time with,
I get some questions that are very reasonable. And then I get some where, recently some fan contacted me with questions about characters. Like I'd written some mirror universe novels. So they were curious about, well, what would this character have been doing? And, this character was established here. And what happened? Why didn't this character appear in the mirror universe? And what happened to this one? And what about him? And what would have been his fate? And I'm like, in some cases, I'm like, well, I made the assumption of this based on this. And then as it gets more and more granular going down, I'm like, I just suddenly resorted to answers. Don't know, don't care. Don't know, don't care. Don't know, don't care. And then they sent like the entire, they must have copied and pasted from like Memory Alpha or Memory Beta, one of the wiki sites about Star Trek, the entire crew manifest that's known to have been in the books on the ISS Enterprise, the original over the years of the 23rd century. They said, is this the correct manifest? I'm like, how the hell would I know? That's a lot of names and a lot of dates. What am I, your historical researcher? Am I your Google? This is not my job. Figure this out for yourself.
Why figure it out?
So at that point, I started getting a little testy. I'm like, this is starting to turn into a colossal waste of my time. Yeah. And at some point, I just had to say, all right, enough.
No response.
Go away.
Yeah.
I did expect any pushback on this specific novel regarding, the support for sexuality. I read an article yesterday in IndieWire about how it's the 20th anniversary of that show, The L Word, and how this 20th anniversary is being celebrated during a time where there is, well, I mean, it's an op-ed, but what this writer believes is the least amount of support for queer women and people that identify as women in particular. Do you expect any pushback from the fan
really.
base?
I mean, again, I'll be surprised if anybody even notices. To be frank, I mean, it's a Star Trek novel. How much cultural impact is it really likely to have? I would like for it to have cultural impact. I would love for people to notice. I would love to have this book get banned in multiple states across the Sun Belt. I would love to have Florida and Texas declare me a threat to the American family. Go ahead, boost my sales. I dare you. Please order in bulk. Feel free to burn them. I don't care if you burn them as long as you pay for them first.
Oh my God! I never thought I'd get David Mack to say burn my books.
Go ahead, burn them. They'll print more. Just pay for them first. I don't care what you do with it once you pay for it. It's not my problem. I don't even care if you read it once you pay for it. Just pay for it. Then do what you want.
I think that's
no, I mean, I think you're right, though. You're right to point out that this is a difficult and dangerous time to be a woman, queer or otherwise, cis or otherwise. Civil rights are being rolled back and trampled in multiple states across the United States. And for some reason that I just, actually, I would say I can't comprehend, except I unfortunately comprehend all too well. The trans community is being particularly targeted with just unbelievably stupid, punitive laws and harsh treatment, not because they pose any genuine threat to the stability of American life or whatever, but because they are so small a community. They are therefore vulnerable. And it's always easy to pick on the vulnerable. It's always easy to scapegoat the vulnerable. And I think that's, one of the things that upsets me most is seeing bullying elevated to the political arena, bullying elevated to the legislative scale of things. When bullying gets to the point where we're now actively legislating, making people's very existence potentially a felony. To make it just to exist as you are honestly are, that's the point where I just have to say, screw you. I'm going to fight you on this one, because now you're messing with my colleagues. You're messing with members of my family. You're messing with my friends. Yeah,
The lack of
that's war. That's war.
The lack of empathy is shocking.
Exactly.
How it grows tremendously.
What have you personally seen in terms of the people you know, the people you work with, the people that you're related to? How have you seen it affect them, this wave of lack of empathy or even weaponizing empathy?
I would agree with that characterization. I'm fortunate, and many of those I'm close to are fortunate in that we live in what are considered blue states or safe states, places like New York, Massachusetts, California. Mm-hmm. But even in places like that, there is still a rising sense of anxiety, paranoia, a sense that, what if this breaks free of these sort of clusters in certain states, and what if it goes national? What if this kind of hate seizes power on a national level? There's a definite, palpable sense of, overnight, because these folks are so visible and vulnerable at the same time, it would be very easy for hateful folks to round them up and put them in camps. I mean, even from blue states, like if this sort of hate takes over at the national level, all bets are off. Nobody's safe. And so there is definitely a sense of, I would say there's definitely a sense of fear. There's a sense of anxiety that rights that, people have struggled to obtain over the course of decades are being wiped away with frightening speed. And there's a sense that there's an urgency now that I don't think has been felt in a long time, that something has to be done to push back and reclaim those rights and defend those rights from further infringement. And that was, again, part of the emotional underpinning for me as I wrote Firewall, was thinking about Seven as this character who is going out for the first time by leaving behind her Voyager family, who have now scattered when they first come home. She finds herself, all alone. All she's really got is Janeway. But at some point, we all have to break away from our parents. And in many ways, Janeway represents a mother figure to Seven. She's the mother figure that takes the place of her real mom and then supplants the Borg queen. But at some point, we all have to break away. We have to make our own identity. We have to define our own place in the world in the world in which we live. And Seven has to do that. And so she goes out, and what she sees, is not the bright, shiny Federation. She's trying to get as far from that. She's going after the fringes of that and then beyond it. And what she's finding is not every place in the universe is fair. They're not all equitable, that there are places that are still mired by economic injustice, social injustice. There are places that are filthy and, poorly maintained. There are places where atrocities still occur, where the rule of law has failed. And she's seeing what happens when the rule of law fails, what the consequences are for the powerless, what the consequences are for the disenfranchised. And that's what awakens in her. Around the middle of the book, she has essentially the great emotional awakening that the Voyager characters had been trying to steer her toward for years. They've been trying to awaken and foster within Seven her sense of human empathy, her sense of human connection, her ability to empathize with other sentient beings, to feel their pain and to appreciate their reality as much as her own. And it's a difficult thing getting this former Borg drone to rediscover this aspect of herself. And then when it finally hits in the middle of Firewall, when somebody is showing her this scene of atrocity, which, if you read the details and you know anything about World War II history, you'll realize is based in part on a real place called Babi Yar, which is a ravine outside Kiev in the Ukraine, where in the early period of World War II in the 30s, the Nazis rounded up all the Jews of Kiev about 60 to 80,000 of them, and they marched them out to this ravine, and they executed them en masse over the course of days. And they filled this ravine with bodies and then just left them there. And so it's one of the most horrific mass murders in World War II history, in world history. If you read the accounts of some people who were lucky enough to survive, who were hit by bullets but were not killed, and then just basically laid under the pile of bodies, some of them for days before they were able to crawl out and told the world about what happened. It's just horrific. And then you have Seven, who has been used by the Borg as this emotionless tool to assimilate thousands of other beings over the course of her 18 years of assimilation, and suddenly being confronted with this scene of mass slaughter, bones bleached in the sun, bodies turned to greasy ash, and she's feeling it on her hands, and she's realizing this is what the murder of 80,000 people feels like. And empathy hits her like a wave. It just bam. Suddenly that's like the worst moment for her to turn on, but that's what it takes. And it connects her to her past as a Borg drone. And suddenly there's all the guilt that comes with it. How many lives did I destroy? For how many thousands of beings was I the last thing they saw before their individuality was stolen? And it's
brutal.
Great.
Yeah.
It's a terrible moment for Seven, but it's also a vital moment. It's the opening of her heart, and it changes her. And then after that, she's on a mission. She now becomes Seven on a mission of both vengeance and atonement.
And broadening it out to the real world, that getting people to see other people's issues or life or just who they are,
your humanity.
Yeah, and that lack of empathy that some people have, they can't get over it unless they see something. But the problem is now they see stuff and they don't believe it. So we're getting to spots where you can't have real life people have that awakening and have that empathy for people because they don't believe what's right in front of them.
Yeah,
that's a whole other.
Nobody knows what to believe. Nobody knows if anything has been deep faked or AI.
Or they're told,
and that's part of why it's so vital in the story that she's not seeing it on a monitor. She's not seeing it at a distance. She's to get down on her knees, literally down on her knees, and she has to physically touch it. And it's when she touches it and feels, the greasy ash of slaughtered bodies and sees the ash of pulverized bones on her hands. You can't deny that. It's like suddenly the reality is there and it's sticking to your hands. It's the equivalent of blood on your hands, but different.
Yeah. Now, Star Trek is such a huge playground to play in. I just want to know, what is, you dedicate so much of your work, so much of your life towards creating more of it. What does it ultimately mean to you? Why?
I guess I grew up with Star Trek imprinting on me. The way a duckling imprints on the first moving thing it sees. My folks, when I was a kid, would plant me in front of the television, and before long, I discovered syndicated reruns of Star Trek. And so I grew up with the ideology of Star Trek wiring my brain from the very beginning, with the notion that we are better as a species if we are together. It is better to make friends than enemies. It is better to make peace than war. It is better to create than to destroy. It is better to heal than to kill. The real world often doesn't work that way, but part of the problem is that we don't choose to make it work that way. If more of us chose to make it work better and insisted that the people who answer to us and run things, if we insisted that they ran it that way, and if more of us voted people out who don't, we could steer the future. We could steer humanity toward a better future. Humanity can have a better future, but it has to want it. And people have to choose it, and they have to fight for it, and they got to work for it. It's not going to come for free. And I think that the value to me of Star Trek as an entity, as a intellectual property that has captured imaginations of people around the world, is that it is this beacon. It says even when we're not perfect, even when we screw up, we backslide, we can still choose to correct. We can still choose to say, yes, I've made a mistake, but I can do better. I can atone. I can fix things. We can choose not to be the same crappy people we've always been. We can choose not to be the same violent people we've always been. We can choose to put aside the anger and try to find a better way. Whereas, I think that there's equal value, for instance, in a franchise like Star Wars, where the message of Star Wars is the violence and danger of fascism is going to be omnipresent. It is never beaten. Every generation must fight it again, but that doesn't absolve you of the responsibility to oppose it, to resist it, to fight, and to fight for something better and defend something better. These are both equally important, equally valid messages. It just so happens that, I think that the Star Wars one is a little more hopeful. The Star Wars one is a little more cynical. The Star Trek one is a little more hopeful. I prefer Star Trek, but I also love Star Wars. So what are you going to do?
So to follow up on what Don's saying, he was talking specifically Star Trek. What about specifically Seven? What is it about the parameters of Seven, her personality, the entire canvas of her? What attracts you to being a part of contributing to that canvas?
And I'd just like to add to that before you answer is that for me, I grew up on Next Gen and loved Deep Space Nine, and I watched Voyager and all that stuff, but I never was super connected with Seven when I watched Voyager. But I think post show in novels and in the Picard series now, the character has developed well. And I'm surprised that I'm like, wow, I'm ready to watch the show and read more books with her now, and keep going. But both what is there with Seven, but in general, how do you choose these characters to explore?
And David, I want to apologize for Don making my question about him. So, correct
me if I'm wrong. You're a New Yorker, right?
I deeply apologize.
Yeah, so am I. He completely understands Trevor. New Yorkers, I'm a Queens boy, so.
Yeah, I live in Queens.
Oh, do you? I was Bayside growing up.
I'm in Astoria.
Oh, great. Okay. Trevor, we found in the woods, yeah, but I'm stuck up here in Boston with him. But yes, why
to answer your question, to speak to your question about what it is about Seven, she is for Voyager, she's their take on the outsider character in the way that Spock was the outsider in TOS, the way that I think Odo was meant to be the outsider in DS9. The way that Data was the outsider in TNG. There's always, in most Trek series, someone who represents the outsider. And he can't be much more of an outsider than Seven in that she was, in the Borg collective. She had been stripped of her humanity. She had been reduced to a drone, a tool, a slave. And they liberate her. And at first, she doesn't even want to be liberated. In many respects, she's got the equivalent of Stockholm Syndrome, whether or not that's a real syndrome that's being debated today. But let that go. But she's got all this psychological damage. She's been cut off from her humanity. And one of the things that I found intriguing is I took this deep dive into her psyche. Even after she's liberated by the crew of Voyager and is now living among the crew of Voyager, who are all very open-minded, they're the best of Starfleet, they're trying to nurture her, they're trying to guide her back into human civilization. So they're all very kid gloves with her. Nobody's that harshly critical, and they're very gentle with her. Whereas real life is not going to be that way once she gets back to Earth and the Federation. Suddenly, life is a lot meaner and a lot less forgiving, and much more prone to prejudice and anger. So she's trying to rediscover her humanity. And as I took the deep dive into her head, I realized, from her point of view, here she is. She's 32 years old. She's finally striking out on her own, cutting the apron strings from her surrogate mother figure of Janeway. And she's realizing that she has been robbed of all of the most formative years of her life. She was robbed of her childhood. Importantly, she was robbed of her adolescence and her young adulthood. All the periods in which most people spend figuring out their identity, who they are, what they want to be, what their sexuality is, what their gender identity is, all those sort of exploratory periods of her life where she should have been building her identity, it was all taken away. She was robbed of all of it. And now she's basically trying to reintegrate into civilization, into society, but she has no idea how any of it works. At one point, I believe I referred to, I think this was in the scene in the club, where she's trying to figure out the mechanisms of flirtation, and it's like a language everybody else speaks that she was never taught. And she's trying to figure it out on the fly, but she can never quite pick up enough to understand what the hell anybody else is talking about.
And Dave, she had a terrible one-night stand. I mean, that was great. I loved it. I mean, it was like
that was probably the suggestion of Kirsten Beyer, because she said, well, it's okay that she has this moment. She says, but it's important that you show that there are negative sides to it, negative consequences on the emotional level. And I said, sure, I get that, and I'll definitely deal with that. So I took that suggestion from Kirsten. And basically, my approach to detailing Seven, exploring and sort of seeking out connection, romantic connection, sexual connection, anything, any kind of human connection, it's all about the same sort of vulnerability that anybody faces, regardless of orientation, where you're coming from. There's an intrinsic vulnerability to putting yourself out there and trying to find somebody else to have an intimate connection with. No, it's a human thing. It's not about any particular gender or anything. It's about, you're opening yourself up to the potential of getting hurt. You're trying to connect. You're trying to feel wanted. You're trying to feel good about yourself. And in a way, you're trying to find that through another person. And it's just so complicated, especially if, again, for Seven, she has been robbed of 18 years of her life when she should have been learning how to do all this. And now she's trying to pick it up on the fly, and just it's all going by her at 100 miles an hour. So she thinks this is going to be this sort of transcendent moment, but as she describes it in the book, instead of transcendent, what she got was tawdry, and she winds up feeling sort of unclean about it, almost ashamed of it. And I put together a Spotify playlist of songs that inspired the book, and it's up on Spotify even now. And one of the songs that was chosen for this, I have certain music that's in mind for the club, and but the song that's playing on the morning after when she wakes up alone is a song called "The Rush" by J.J. Wilde, and it's all about desire and shame. It's about wanting to connect, but feeling ashamed of your own desires. And there's a line in the song, one of the lyrics, and I'm glad my mother can't see me, because if she did, I don't know how I would go on. And then there's also a line, it's easier, to learn to forget. Now is when I learned to forget. It's easier than learning to live with regret. So it's basically that's sort of where Seven is emotionally. At that point, is she's yearning for connection but doesn't know how to get there, and nobody seems inclined to be patient enough to teach her. But that's also what's going to be important about the relationship she forms later in the book, because one of the other things, again, element of the classic Bildungsroman style, is she's going to meet the first great love of her life. Yes, she dated she dated Chakotay, and that didn't work out too well. They eventually obviously had to break up, because canonically they broke up. And I sort of explained some of the reasons for that. When Seven is denied her place in Starfleet, this creates a lot of envy and a lot of anger and a lot of resentment, especially when Chakotay gets promoted, and now he's going to be in charge of this top secret project on the Protostar, which is getting all this sort of attention, but it means he can't bring her with him because she's
has no role.
Security risk. And so she envies him, and she's also angry at being left behind, and she takes this toxic stew and she self-sabotages their relationship, and it's why they end up, she's just got too much anger. She's got too much resentment built up, and she can't forgive him for succeeding and having to leave her behind. So as much as, they wanted to hint at Chakotay being some, big thing for her at the end of Voyager, I see that flaming out. So I sort of felt like I had this opportunity for Seven to find the first great love of her life. And of course, those things don't always last. And we all have, or many people, I should say, many people have that sort of first early, big relationship. That first time you felt really hard for somebody and it lasted for a while. And some people marry their first true love and some people don't. Sometimes those relationships, for any number of reasons, don't work out, and you move on in your life. So I presume that's, again, going to have to happen with Seven and the character of Ellery Cade at some point, but it doesn't happen in this book. One of the things I was positive I did not want to have in this book was the disposable gay relationship. I did not want the trope of bury your gaze. I wanted to make sure that the interesting person of color who's part of the team doesn't have to get killed to show how dangerous the situation is. And it was little things like that. Like, there's the trope of, the bury your gaze is probably the most pernicious of them, where you give the character the relationship, but somehow feel compelled to kill off the gay lover before the end of the story. Drove me crazy. And I know queer readers hate that. So I made a conscious choice. I'm like, no, I'm going to subvert that. I may even walk right up to the line and make them think I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to do it. Because I specifically wanted my queer characters to have a happy ending. I want them to, be able to say, happily ever after until next.
Because you frame the whole conversation of Seven telling the story to, I was butchering the Bejazel, thank you. I was practicing that earlier. Was that something?
And you did a terrible job.
I did it horrible both times. Was that intentional? Was that thought out ahead of time? Was that coming from somewhere else to frame the story being told to her? Because that's kind of a tragic relationship, or not tragic, bad relationship that developed.
Well, yeah, it's an ominous thing to sort of. Basically, I wanted a framing sequence to sort of pull things together, because they wanted part of the book, at least something in the book, to ground it in the Picard series that viewers saw. Something that they would recognize, a depiction that would at least feel more familiar. Because I'm doing this sort of origin story, which is like 20 years back, in which the Rangers are only just starting to sort of deal with the effects of losing oversight, losing their legitimacy, and they're slowly going to degrade into the Robin Hood-like band they are 20 years later. They're not there yet. They're still much closer to their origins when she first joins them. So she's there just as they're beginning to fragment and lose their cohesion. But the framing sequence with Bejazel, that was basically about grounding it in something that people who've seen the series, at least season 1, would go, okay, I recognize this depiction of Seven as a Fenris Ranger, and the sort of depiction of her meeting Bejazel is just a dramatization of something. She mentions having met Bejazel on Fenris, that Bejazel posed as someone who wanted to become a Fenris Ranger. She said that in canon. And we know that later Bejazel takes an interest in harvesting Borg tech from ex-Borg, and that it was an unfortunate comment by Seven that caused Bejazel to target Icheb. And so the idea is that this is that canonical moment, which she sort of spoke of in past tense. This is that moment. This is that tragic moment when Seven was smart enough to downplay her own Borg implants for self-defense, but unfortunately puts a target on Icheb's back without realizing.
But to clarify, you were asked to ground it in Picard.
Yes, right. I was asked that there should be something, even if just a framing sequence, that gives viewers who have watched Star Trek Picard something to ground it in that is familiar.
Right, because it's
interesting. Your depiction of her as Ranger and the character of Bejazel and that story, which is part of the known Picard continuity, it gives us a place to hang our hat.
Right. Yeah, because it was interesting to you're forced the framing of it just by the title, right? Having Star Trek Picard : Firewall, like you're forced that in your mind by its fans, and that's because it's the most recent series that they want to put out there. So you're
also it's because it's based on events that are specific to that series.
Sure.
The whole thing with Fenris Rangers, of course, you can't just label it Star Trek Voyager because the Fenris Rangers are not part of that.
Yeah.
So it has to be sold as prequel story under the Picard banner. Even though most of it feels like a Voyager
series. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, thank you so much for your time. So just before you go, you're starting off 2024 strong with Firewall. Can you talk about anything you're working on, or what you or if you can't, then is there?
Well, let's see. I mean, obviously I don't want to promise anything I can't deliver on. Although I do have a novel project I'm working on. It doesn't have a home yet, so I don't want to say too much about that.
Sure.
What I do have coming down the pike that I know of in 2024 are 6 pieces of short fiction, 4 of them for Star Trek, 2 original. The 4 pieces for Trek are going to be published in Star Trek Explorer magazine. The first of them comes out in March in issue 11, and that's a short story called Dignified Transfer. It's a TNG story set during the Stargazer era. Don't want to say too much about it. Obviously, it's a rumination on death and loss. And what's important about that one to me, aside from the fact that I think it turned out really well as a story, is that it is dedicated to my late father-in-law. And it's coming out during the month of what would have been his birthday.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of important to me. In issue 12, I'm going to have a story called Memoriam. Again, don't want to spoil it, but we'll say it's a TOS movie era story. It takes place during the era of, around the time of between Star Trek 5 and Star Trek 6, somewhere in there. Issue 13, we'll have a story called Family History, I believe. Family History. That's going to be, it's sort of timeless. I guess you would classify it more as TNG than anything else, and it's basically focuses on Wesley Crusher as a traveler. And then the one that I'm writing right now for issue 14, which will be out at the end of the year, is Picard based, and I'm just going to say it's called Freeblade. And if you've watched Picard, even season 1, you can probably figure out what Freeblade is. So that's what's coming on the Trek front in terms of short stories. And then I have 2 original pieces of short fiction, which were written over the last year or 2 for themed anthologies, which are going to be coming out. And I've been assured they're both going to come out in 2024. One is called Combat Monsters, edited by Henry Hertz. I believe that'll be out from Blackstone Publishing. And the premise there is real battles of World War II, reimagined if they involved certain monsters of authors' choosing. So each author was told to pick a battle or engagement of World War II, and then insert any kind of mythological monster, cinematic monster of their own creation, whatever they wanted. And Henry basically sort of curated it to make sure nobody chose the same creatures, that there was a variety. And so without saying what kind of monster, I'll just say that my story is called Boxcar, which is the name of the plane that dropped the second atomic bomb, not the first. And it's basically the story of the dropping of the second atomic bomb on Japan, but involving a monster. And then the other anthology is Last Train Out of Kepler 283C, edited by David Boop, scheduled for publication by Baen. It's coming from Baen Books. And that's his third and probably final collection of what he calls space western short stories. And for that, I wrote an original short story called Living by the Sword, which, again, don't want to say too much about, although one thing I am proud of is that I decided to make the protagonist and point of view character basically an adolescent girl of Chinese descent living sort of in the far future, and to make sure that it was culturally sensitive and correct, and that I didn't make any really stupid blunders. I got some wonderful help and expert consultation from my friend, fellow author Mary Fan, who is a first-generation Chinese American. Tremendous, talented author in her own right, lovely person, great singer. But she was very helpful in that she shared with me, her perspective as a person of Chinese descent, to help me make sure I got the details right about this person's take on their own cultural background. And then there might also be another piece, an academic piece of publishing.
Oh,
a book
wow.
of essays about Star Trek and media tie-ins, which I was asked to write an essay. I wrote an essay basically about the profession of writing tie-ins and what the industry looks like from a professional perspective rather than a fan perspective. And that's, I believe, called Strange Novel Worlds. You recognize it. Anyway, that's also supposed to be out, I think, summer or fall. So I've got a lot of, weird stuff that's not my usual. Plus, I've been working on an audio drama project. We're waiting for final green light to go to script. I'm hoping we get it. If we do, then hopefully later this year, I'll be able to announce that. But if we don't get the green light, then it'll go into turnaround and die, and we'll never speak.
Well, the quantity and, more importantly, the quality of your writing is so impressive. And so thank you so much for joining us.
Right.
Everyone,
wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Don. Thank you.
I was going to say, where should people buy buckets of your crates of your latest book? But go ahead, Trevor.
No, go ahead, Don.
The whole reason he's here.
That actually is a very, very important question.
Do you have a preference where they buy Star Trek Picard?
As long as you buy them new and buy them either in ebook or in print, I don't really care what retailer you buy them from. Buy them from Kobo, buy them from iBooks, buy them from Google Books, buy them from Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I don't care.
One of each.
If you want to keep up with just what I have coming and what's on sale and what's going to be in pre-sale, you can visit my website, davidmack.pro. That's David Mack, MACK.PRO. And from the front page, you can navigate to my bibliography. You'll see the most recent titles right there on the front page. You can order right there from the front page. It'll say upcoming, pre-order now, or now on sale. So that's pretty much a great way to keep track of what I have currently available. If you're interested in Star Trek short fiction, I and many other great writers, including folks like Jake Black and Una McCormack, James Swallow, Christopher Bennett, and many others, Greg Cox, have been contributing short fiction to the Star Trek Explorer magazine. Some of those are being collected now in special anthology collection volumes. So if you want to get them as they come out, subscribe to the magazine, get the digital supplement added on, because sometimes some stories are printed in the print magazine, and sometimes they're printed or distributed only in the digital supplement. Later on, I think they all get collected in the collection editions. But if you want to get them as they come out, sign up for the magazine, get the digital supplement, and every 2 months, aside from all the other great stuff you get from Star Trek Explorer magazine, you also get quality, new, original Star Trek fiction that you can't get anyplace else. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, if you want to track me on social media and yak with me, you can find my author page on Facebook at facebook.com/TheDavidMack. And you can find me on Blue Sky, which is the replacement to the Bird site now owned by the fascist idiot Elon Musk. You can find me on Blue Sky under the handle David Mack.
Nice. Well, it's Friday night, so I'm in a good mood. So, Trevor, I'm actually let you have the last word on this one for a change.
David, this is going to be a really, really easy question. But what I want to know is, how many minutes into this interview did you realize that Don is the most boring person you've ever talked to in your life?
I mean, is he in competition with you?
No. Dave, how could you say that?
He gets the sound effects from me for that one.
Dave, we might have to bring you in on this podcast. I think this dynamic really works now. The three of us. This
works. Well, yeah. we're gonna have an all-star episode one day. Maybe many months or years from now, and bring our favorites back. So you can
actually, in all seriousness, all jokes aside, Dave, I have severe ADD, and it actually got worse during the pandemic. And I have been really struggling with book reading, really struggling with it. And it's been really difficult. And I got into Firewall, and I honestly just felt this confidence that I'm going to finish this. I really enjoy it. And I want to say thank you for that. And I honestly hope everybody gets this book. It's difficult for me to read right now, and anything. And I found that I found it to be very engaging right away.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me. And I'm glad that it has provided that positive experience for you.
Yes, thank you very much.
But I'm honored that you feel that way about it.
And I can confirm that Trevor can, in fact, read.
I can read. It's a struggle.
You envy him for that, don't you, Don?
Thank you. See, he's good with this. David, all the luck in the world with this book. It sounds awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Congratulations. Yep. And thank you so much for joining us, and really appreciate your time.
Yes,
it's been a pleasure, Don. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, thanks so much. Have a good night. All right, welcome back. And wow, Trevor, that was an epic conversation with Dave and really went deeper than I anticipated and really loved talking to him. And I've read a ton of his books and so thrilled to have him.
Folks, go out and get the book.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not kidding when I mentioned in the interview that I really do struggle with reading now. Yes, I can read. I can read fine.
We have proof.
I don't. I'm just not. My attention span, my attention deficient. It's bad. The ADD is really bad, and I really struggle. This book brought me in right away, and I'm invested. And I don't know if that's a selling point for any of you, but I highly recommend it. I usually read autobiographies,
comics,
and depressing books, and comics, and stuff like that.
At your age.
Obituaries at my one. You're not kidding. And
oh, that was harsh. That was dark. I apologize.
Well, it is.
You
what it is.
Can't afford a newspaper.
It is. You are such a. It's a very good book. Please go out and buy it. Go out and buy it.
I will say that, I enjoy a lot of Star Trek novels since I was a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't read to me like many others. I was very surprised.
Mm-hmm.
It was
it cooks, it moves.
It's mature. It works really well. So that's amazing.
I really, really enjoy it.
And,
Don.
Yes.
I'm mad at you. Last week.
Yes, sir.
I did something that I actually did not want to do.
Ooh, what was that?
But I did it
for
the sake of our friendship.
David Lynch Dune.
I did it for the podcast.
Everything for the podcast.
I did it because for a moment I was like, I like Don. And you,
yes, sir,
pissed that all away.
Okay. What did you do?
Yes,
sir,
invited you.
I didn't respond to you.
To an IMAX screening.
It's on my calendar. I didn't say sure.
Dude, you're not invited anymore, and I'm dead serious. You're not invited anymore.
That's sad.
You're not invited anymore.
He did. He texted me and said, hold some dates for Dune 2, and then we'll do a podcast.
In IMAX. And I'm talking like we have one of the few full frame 80-foot tall IMAXs, and other than Oppenheimer and Nope, like Dune, even though it wasn't filmed that way, is actually being converted for full IMAX. And I was like, Don, let's go together. Then afterward, let's come back, record a podcast. I'll get tickets. Let me know. Dead silence. You're out. You are out.
Well, can I tell you something, Trevor? It looks like I'm going to be on DC for work. That work is the thing that you do to make money and buy things.
Mm-hmm. I do plenty of work. Thank you very much.
Yeah. By the way, the toilets are kind of dirty. Can you get back to that after the show?
Dude, you better cut that out or I'm going to punch you in the face. Cut that out.
Well, thank you so much, Trevor. I unfortunately cannot join you, but I would love to see it perhaps the following
week. Could have
at
least got back to me. No, it's that painful. It's that painful to communicate with me. Is that painful?
It's torturous to communicate with you.
Is that painful? So are we going to? The presentation's going to suck, but isn't Fandango or Fathom Events doing a Dune? It's a Lynch Dune screening in the next
we have
month
to
so.
go. Absolutely.
Are we going?
Absolutely, we have to go. Yeah, we should completely see the best Dune film ever made.
Yeah, I have a state issued legal medical marijuana card. Am I allowed to be high off my face during that film? Because that is the only way I'm going to be able to get through it.
I love that movie.
It is something terrible.
No, it's not. We're definitely going to go see that again. Hopefully, be a better print than the one that you took me to. I think.
Hey man, that was an original 35 print.
Yeah, there was just constant dirt everywhere. Torturous.
You know what's so sad?
What?
You know what's so sad? I see a lot of 35 prints, and that was actually pretty good. I mean, the prints today, they're They're all in collectors' hands, and they're just in brutal condition.
Well,
Anyways,
what's not been brutal has been this season of No Win Scenario so far, because we've had an artist, novelist.
guess.
I'm
Great
really,
guess.
really surprised and enjoying how we've been going this season. Who knows where the rest of the season will take us, and what theme we will have for season 3. Can you imagine? We should be thinking about season 3.
I'm
Quit. Please quit.
excited.
You ready to quit? No.
I'm excited by how. No, am I ready to quit?
Yeah.
No, but I feel that you're ready to cut me out of this podcast somehow. I feel it. I can feel it.
I'm training my daughter. I'm
not going to let you do it. I'm going to be like a barnacle. I'm going to just latch onto you. I'm going to bite and not let go.
Well,
sorry.
Okay.
Don, always
sir.
a pleasure talking to you. I
It
know we
was.
fight a lot, but I actually, after the David Mack interview, I texted you and I said, thank you.
This is after the David Mack episode.
Yes, I did.
Can you at least pretend that this wasn't recorded 3 weeks later?
After a recent interview that we did, I texted you and I said thank you
For being such a role model to you and being so inspirational.
Dude, I'm trying to have a sincere moment.
Wow.
I said thank you. You're doing a great job, and I'm really happy to be doing this with you.
Wow.
Yeah,
I think we should just end it with that.
I think so.
And nothing more sarcastic. So for No
Yeah,
Win Scenario,
nothing more sarcastic.
my name is Don.
My name is Trevor.
Try again. My name is Don. Let's try that one again.
My name's
For
Trevor.
For No Win Scenario.
For No
I'm
Win
Don.
Scenario. And I'm Trevor.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. Bye now.